So you've heard the term canon probably in talking about the Bible itself. Canon doesn't refer to big guns, but to, it's a Greek word that means essentially a measuring stick, a measuring rod, something that you use to measure other things by. The Bible is referred to as a canon because it is the measure by which we judge other works that claim to be prophetic revelations from God. You may have also heard the term closed canon. The idea of a closed canon means that nothing can be added to the Bible or removed. The Bible is what it is, and it will stay that way forever. That doesn't mean that there can be no further revelation from God. Some people believe that, but Paul wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 14 that they should earnestly desire to prophesy. And prophecy is just it's the relaying of a message from God. So if you are a prophet, you are a messenger, which is kind of the same definition of the word, the original Hebrew word for angel. It's a messenger. All of Scripture, in some sense, is prophetic. It's a message from God. And some books are simply the written record of prophecy. So when Paul says that he wants the Corinthians to desire to prophesy, surely he believed that prophecy had not come to an end. God is still revealing messages to mankind. So saying that the Bible is a closed canon does not mean that God doesn't speak to people anymore, that he doesn't send revelations, or even that there can't be inspired written works. What it means is that the measuring rod by which we judge all of those other written works and all those claims to revelation is fixed. We're not going to change it anymore. Can you imagine what would happen if we took a yardstick and kept changing it? Like, a yardstick is 3 feet today, or 36 inches. Well, next year it's going to be 37 inches or 33 inches. How would we ever build anything if we never knew from 1 month to the next how long a foot was, or how long a yard was, or a meter, whichever measure you want to use? This is the basis of the idea of a closed canon. Deuteronomy 25, 13 and 14 says that we're not to have unequal measures in our houses. This means that if you have a measuring stick, which everybody who does business has some way of measuring things, whether it's by weight or by size or something, if you have one yardstick that's 36 inches and another yardstick that is 40 inches, and then you sell something by the yard, you use one stick with some customers and another stick with other customers, well, you're stealing from one of those sets of customers. God doesn't like that. In Proverbs 20 verse 10 actually says that unequal measures is an abomination to God. So the idea of a closed canon is a good one. We need to have something that we can use to measure prophecy and claims of revelation, to know whether it's true or false. If we added and removed books from the Bible all the time, that would be a dream come true for false prophets, false teachers who want to deceive people. But for people who value objective truth, a closed canon is a very good thing. And this means something else for Bible interpretation. We can judge whether a revelation is from God by whether it aligns with all of Scripture. Does it contradict anything in the canon? If it does, then we can rule it out. This is a false teaching. But we do have to be very careful that we are interpreting it correctly, because many things have lots of different ways that they can be interpreted. Scripture itself is very difficult to understand sometimes. That's why we have so many different denominations, so many different opinions on what Scripture means, is because so much of it can be interpreted in multiple ways. Some people believe that the letters of Paul should not be included in Scripture because they contradict the words of Yeshua or the words of Moses. I think that is totally false. Their interpretation of Paul contradicts their interpretation of Yeshua and Moses. Every word of Paul, every word of the letters that are included in our current canon can be interpreted to be in perfect alignment with the words of Yeshua and Moses. Not contrary to Torah, not contrary to God's law, but in perfect alignment. The problem is when we choose to interpret things in a way that makes them contradict Scripture. This is a way, using the fixed canon of Scripture, is a way that you can judge whether or not your interpretation of some passage in the Bible is correct or not. If you have interpreted a passage in such a way that it necessarily contradicts multiple other passages in the Bible, then your interpretation is wrong. It's as simple as that. You have two choices. Your interpretation of the passage under question is wrong, or your interpretation of those other passages is wrong. One of those two. Or, well, your interpretation of both passages could be wrong too. That's always a possibility. I've been wrong a lot. Sometimes I've been wrong in every possible interpretation that I had of a passage, and I had to change my mind. But that is the value of having a fixed measuring rod. You can keep measuring your opinions over time to that existing rod, and over time you will get closer and closer to what God really intended for you to get out of the messages that He gave us. So don't be upset with the idea of a closed canon. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a good thing. God loves when we use the same measure to judge something, well, to judge one thing and another. He hates unequal measures because those are ways that people can be deceived and cheated. You may not like everything that's in the Bible. You may not like the standard interpretations that most people give those things. But I am certain that everything that is included in the 66 books of the commonly accepted biblical canon are true and are accurate. Copyist errors and translation errors, things like that aside. The original writings, the original forms in which those prophecies and revelations were given are 100% accurate and reliable and agree with each other in every point. When you come across something that seems like it disagrees with something else in Scripture, look for alternative interpretations. Consider, am I understanding this wrong? Am I reading this one wrong? Could this translation be a little off? Compare translations. Ask other people for their opinion. See what scholars and theologians have said about this passage. It could be that, and it probably is, that other people have wrestled with the exact same confusion that you're having. And once again, this is the value of a closed canon, because we can look at the opinion of scholars from 1,000 years ago, compare them to the opinions of scholars today. They're working with essentially the same texts. The underlying texts have not changed in all that time. We've discovered some new sources, maybe some more accurate manuscripts here and there, but the variations between them have been very minor. You can rely on the scriptures that we have. You can rely on the Bible being accurate and the closed canon being a reliable measure of every prophecy. So if some book comes along and says, or someone says, this book belongs in the Bible, I don't know why it's not there. Or somebody says, I have a word from God, adultery is now okay. You can reject these things. None of those things can be added to the canon because it is closed for everybody's safety, for everybody's good. And you can judge whether or not that new book that somebody has told you about, or this new revelation from God, is accurate by looking at that canon. If it doesn't measure up, it's false, and you can throw it out. This is Jay Carper. from American Torah. Be blessed.